Welcome everybody to this tutorial. My name is Scott McMillan. I'm the project lead for the IHSS benchmark dashboard. And in this video, I'm going to show you the steps necessary to reformat your incident data in Excel when you've extracted your data from your incident reporting system into an Excel, and only if your Excel does not have Power Query. If you have a newer version of Excel, particularly Microsoft 365 version of Excel, you will likely have Power Query capabilities, in which case there's another video that you can reference that'll show you how to use Power Query to reformat your data very easily. So this video is for those of you using Excel that does not have Power Query. So what we're seeing here is a sample data set from a reporting system. And it is not laid out in the format that's required for the benchmark dashboard. The benchmark dashboard needs for the data to be laid out in such a way that each row in the table represents a single category. So if your reporting system is similar to this one that allows you to capture multiple categories for a single report, but exports it into Excel in such a way that all of those categories are separated into their own column, as we see in this data set, we've got category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now this tells me that in this particular data set, there's at least one report somewhere in this data that contains 6 different categories. What we need is for this to be transformed so that each one of these categories becomes their own row. So what we should expect to see is that report numbers will actually be repeated based on the number of categories that are attached to that report. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that we're going to need to do is add a new tab or worksheet. I'm calling mine Final Data, but you can call it something else, because this is where we're going to work towards getting a final set of data that's in the format that's required. So we're going to be doing a lot of steps here, but we are eventually going to be moving everything into this final tab. So we can start by getting that ready. As well, we can start by opening up another new worksheet, because the first step that we're going to need to do is, when we go back to the data, is we're going to isolate and copy over just the columns containing the report number and the categories. So I'm going to highlight column A, which happens to have the report number, and then I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to click on and highlight all of these other 6 columns that contain the categories. And then I'm going to copy, Control C, go to my blank page, and I'm going to paste. So now what we've done is we've just isolated just the report number and just the categories and separate it from the rest of the data. And that's because we need to perform a function of reorganizing these, transforming these into their own row. And it's easier to do that by not including all of those other columns in the data set, because that just creates a lot of problems and challenges for us. So right now we're just going to focus on transforming this. So to do that, we're going to highlight all of the data. So I'm just going to click on cell A1 here. I'm going to hold Shift and Control, click on the right arrow. That's going to highlight just the columns that have headers in them. And then I'm going to hold Shift and Control and push down on the arrow pad. That's going to highlight only the rows that have data. You can highlight the columns entirely if you want. There's a couple ways to do it, but I like to do it this way. That way I know I'm only working with cells that actually have data in them. Okay, the next step is you're going to hold the Alt button, and you're going to push D and then P. What that does is it brings up a box which is kind of from an older version of Excel. So we're actually leveraging an older version of Excel and the wizard that allows us to create a pivot table. Because what we're going to do is transform this data into a pivot table. So we want to make sure that this is checked off, Excel list or database, yes, and we want a pivot table. But actually on the top here, forgive me, we actually want this one here, multiple consolidation ranges. In other words, our data's got multiple columns that we need to convert. So we want it to be multiple consolidation ranges. And then we're going to hit next. This one is fine. Yes, created a single page field. Click next. And now it wants us to actually identify the range. So unfortunately, we're going to have to go back and do exactly what we've already sort of done, which is to highlight the range. So I'm going to start by clicking here, holding the shift, control, and then shift control down. It's identified our range, and we're going to click next. It's saying, do you want it to be in a new worksheet or the existing one? We want it in a new worksheet. So we're going to click finish. So what that's done is it's now opened another worksheet, which is fine, and it's created a pivot table. So it's got all of the report numbers over here, and then the columns over here. But instead of it actually having the category name, what it does is it's counting it. It's saying that there's one entry in this cell, there's one in this cell, et cetera, et cetera. Don't worry about the numbers. They really don't mean anything to us. What ultimately we want is to go to the very bottom, because what a pivot table allows you to do is double click on any one of these cells that contains a number, and it then opens up that same data in actually the way that we want. So what I mean by this is if we double click on the grand total here, see, it now opens up another tab with all of the data, but it's actually organized it in exactly the way that we want. So I just sort of expand on these columns a little bit to make it easier to see. We can now see that we've got column A is now report numbers, which is great. But you'll notice that the report numbers are now repeated. We went from, in our original data, having only one report number per row to now having multiple versions. So report number 1, for example, now is counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, actually 6. So each report number now has 6 different categories or rows attached to it, which is a start. It's close to where we want, but we're not quite there yet, because we don't need these blank rows, right? We only really care at the end of the day for the rows that have an actual category. So what it's done is it's taken those 6 categories, columns, and combined them into one called a value column. In fact, we can rename this if we wanted, but I'm not going to worry about it because we're going to transform it and take it, cut it, and paste it into the final data. What we need to do now is a couple of things. First of all, we don't need this column anymore with the categories, so we're going to delete that. We also don't need this other column that's added, which has the page with these item numbers, so we're going to delete that. All we really want is the report number and the categories, but we don't want the blanks. So we are going to highlight this column, and over on the right-hand side, there's this magnifying glass called Find and Select. We're going to click that. We're going to go down to where it says Go to Special, which is basically going to bring up a box with a bunch of different options. And we're going to select the one that says blanks, because that's what we want. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to find blanks. That's what we're asking it to do, is find me all the blanks in this highlighted column that I've selected. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, before I hit OK, it's very important. Don't click anything else after this. We're going to click OK. So now all of these blanks are highlighted. We want to keep them highlighted. So don't click anywhere, because if you click outside, you're not going to, these are no longer going to be highlighted, and you're going to have to repeat that process. So now that they're highlighted for us, we're going to go back up to the top of the ribbon here, and there's this delete, and we're going to click on the delete, and we want to delete the sheet rows. Basically, we want to delete all of the rows that have a blank within column B. And we click that, and there we are. We've now removed any rows that do not have a category. Because if they don't have a category, it's really not data that we want to be counted. And what we're left with is the report number and the categories. And we can now see that, for example, report number 1 is repeated 3 times. because that particular report has 3 different categories: property damage, break and enter, alarm intrusion. So that's the first step. We've transformed our original data by isolating just the report numbers and the categories, and then we've transformed those into their rows. So now what we can do is we can actually copy these. So I'm just going to copy from here. I'm going to highlight those, and then again, I'm going to hold Shift and Control and push on the down arrow on my keypad. I'm going to copy, and we're going to go to our final data set. And because it's the row number in the category, we're going to start over here with the report number. I'm going to right click. I'm going to paste these as values. I don't need them into that same blue colored table format. So we're already off to a great start. Our final data, we've now got all of the report numbers isolated, and we've got the categories, and they're all in one column with their own row, which is fantastic. Now we need to bring over this other information. We need to bring over the healthcare name, the date, the time, the department, and these other fields. To do that, we're going to use a formula. And it's essentially the same formula that we're just going to repeat for each one of these separate columns. So we're going to start with the first one, which is the healthcare facility name. Okay? And we're going to hit equals, and we're going to type in index. And it's going to pop up here. We're going to double click. So the first thing it's asking for us is what's your array? What do you want? So I sort of think of it this way. What information do I want to put into this cell? What I want is the healthcare facility name, because that's literally what the title of this column is. But where do I get that from? Well, I get that from my original data. So if I go back to my original data, which is sheet 1, I'm going to highlight the column where healthcare facility names are contained, which is column B. Now I'm going to hit comma, and now I'm going to type in match. And I'm going to double click where it says match. Because now I'm going to tell it sort of where to find and what exactly I want to try to match things on. So the first thing is we want to match, so we go back to our final data. We want to match on the report number, because that's the sort of the thing that keeps everything connected, is the report number. So I want the first one for this row is going to be cell B2. Now, unfortunately, it's blocking B2, so I'm just going to go ahead and type in B2. So that's what I wanted to look up. I wanted to look at this cell, find this report number, and then it wants to know, okay, now where do I look for that? Where's the lookup array? Where do you want me to go look for this report number? Again, we want to go back to our original data, and we want you to find that in this column. And then we're going to hit comma. And it wants to know, okay, well, how picky do you want me to be with the search? You want it to be less than something, exact match, greater than something. We want it to be an exact match. We want it to match the exact report number exactly as it's stated. So we're going to double click on that. And the last thing we just need to do is we need to close this formula. We need 2 additional brackets to close that. So shift and 0, which is a close bracket, 1 more, and then we hit enter. And now we've got a facility name. And now we can double check to make sure, did that work properly? Well, easy enough. Is report 1 from healthcare facility MMM. If we go to our original data, report 1, sure enough, MMM. So now that we know, we're satisfied that that seems to have worked, what we can do now is, with this cell highlighted, in the bottom right, just hover over that, and you double click, and it's going to essentially drag that formula all the way down to the bottom. And there we go. And again, if this worked properly, we've got 3 report 1s. We should have 3 MMMs because they're all from the same site, and sure enough, they are. We've got 4 report 2s, and they all come from the same facility. Excellent. So that tells me that this worked. So we've now just recoded and added all the healthcare facility names. So all we now need to do is repeat this formula for the rest of these. This same Reference is going to be the report number. What's going to change, though, of course, is where we're telling it to go look in terms of what we want to bring back. So you can copy this if you want. Control C. Just note when you copy a formula, you actually have to hit escape afterwards, or it's going to cause you nothing but problems. Then we'll click into the cell where we want the formula. We will click in the formula bar, and we'll hit Control V to paste it. Now, we are going to have to make adjustments. So the first thing we want to have to adjust is, what's the first thing that we want to bring back? We wanted to bring back the original formula was asking us to bring back the facility name, which was column B in our original data, which is in sheet 1. We don't want healthcare facility name. Now we want date. So you can highlight sheet 1 all the way to the end of the B. And instead, you're going to click on sheet 1, and now you're going to click on the column you do want, which is, in this case, we're doing the date. So you're going to want column I. You're still wanting the report number, so you still want B2 as the reference, and the report number is still contained and will always be contained in column A in this sheet. So really, the only thing we needed to change was that initial range. And if I hit enter, and it brings back a value. Now, you'll be probably saying, well, that doesn't look anything like a date, and you're absolutely correct. And that's because this column is not formatted as a date, so Excel doesn't know that it's a date. So to do that, we just simply highlight the column, we right-click, we go down to Format Cells, we find date in the category list here, and then you can really pick whatever one you want. I personally like this one. It also sort of depends, I guess, whether you're Canadian or American, but nonetheless, it doesn't really matter. And just as we did in the first time, we can now click on here, double click. It'll now extend that formula all the way down. And again, we can kind of check our work as we go. We should expect the date to match these first 3 rows because they're all part of the same report number, and sure enough, they do. Now, you can do the same thing for time. However, you will notice that in our original data set, this particular reporting system that exports it into this format combines the date and time into this one column. So I click on here, even though the date's the only one visible, it actually does contain the time as well. You can see here that it's 12:18 p.m. So we don't really need a separate column for the time. It's already contained in one, and the benchmark dashboard is okay with that. The benchmark dashboard can identify if the time and the date are in the same column, so there's no problems with that. So we're okay. It's got the date and the time. But you'll notice that it has the formula in here. So at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up and get rid of all the formulas by replacing them with just values. But we might as well wait and do that all at once instead of piecemealing it. So, but we have determined we don't need the time because it's already built into the date. So you can actually go ahead and delete this. If your data set separates date and time, you simply need to repeat that formula with the time. So we're going to copy this formula again. You, of course, have the option of just writing it out each time. Don't forget to hit escape. Click on here, paste it. Now we're focusing on department unit area, which means our first range, what it is that we actually want, which is department unit area, now needs to change. You just got to make sure you don't get the comma in there. And we're going to replace it with the column that contains the department unit area, which is column J. So I'm going to click on that. Everything else stays the same. B2, the report number, is still our primary reference, and the report number in this particular original data is still in column A. So we're just going to hit enter. Just expand this a little bit so we can see, and there we go. It brought over a location. Same as we've done before. Bottom right-hand corner, double click. Brings it over. Again, quick quality check. This is the same department, which makes sense because that incident happened in that same location as part of the same report. So far everything looks great. 2 more times. Copy the formula. Hit escape. Click on the cell. Click in the formula bar. Paste it. highlight sheet 1 up till the end of the letter. Yep, didn't get the comma in there, which is good. Go back to the original data. This time we're focusing on workplace violence typology column. So we're going to click on the original data. We're going to scroll to the right. And this particular data set actually doesn't have workplace violence. So that's okay. So if yours doesn't, then obviously you don't need it. If it does, you would just highlight this column and continue on like we did. But since this one doesn't, we're going to escape out of there, and we're actually just going to delete that column. And instead, we're going to carry on with law enforcement involved. So we'll copy the formula, hit escape, click in here, click in the formula, Control V to paste it. Highlight sheet, the first range, try not to get the comma. There we go. Back to the original data. Click the column that we do want, which is, this one's called police file number. That's fine. And enter. And double click. And you might say, well, there's nothing there. Why is it blank? That's because obviously not every report has a file number. If we did scroll down, we should expect to see a file number appear somewhere in this data set. Or perhaps, oh, there we go. There's one there. So there's not a lot of them, but we got what is there, which is great. Okay, so we're very close to being finished, folks. So we've brought all the data over. It's now in the format that we want. Each row represents a category, not a report number, but we've added all the necessary information to that category, such as the facility name, the report number, the date, and the location. Now what we need to do is we need to just get rid of these formulas. So the easiest way to do that is actually to either probably just highlight all the columns. You can also click on this little space up here between at the top of the header. That also highlights, that'll highlight everything, the entire worksheet. We are going to hit Control C, so we're copying the data, and then we are immediately going to right click, and we're going to repaste it. And this time we're going to paste it as values. So you really don't notice any difference unless you actually click in the cells. You'll notice that all of our formulas are gone because we don't need them anymore. And actually formulas can create challenges. It may be read wrong by the data mapping tool. So it's just easy to remove all the formulas. And that, folks, is it. That's how we reformat our original data, which again had multiple categories per report, but they were in separate columns and in a single row. And we've now converted it into our final data format, which is separate rows per category. We can now just simply delete all of these other ones that we don't really need. Click on them, right click, delete. And there we are. So this final data is what you can now upload into the benchmark dashboard and continue on with the process. All right, well, that's it. So I hope this was helpful to you folks. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to the IHSS or myself. Otherwise, I thank you very much for watching, and good luck.